All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar, EB5 TEAs, What to Know in 2018. I'm Michael Kester, partner and lead EB5 economist here at Impact DataSource. Before we get started, just a few house cleaning items. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. Try to get those worked into the presentation. And anyone who has questions throughout the presentation, you can see there's a place, I believe in the top right-hand corner for you to type in any questions you might have. If I go through any slides or anything, a little bit too quickly, or you want to revisit anything, we will be posting the webinar to our YouTube channel, so we'll be recorded, and we'll also be send out the slides as well to everyone that attended as well. So thanks again for joining. So just a quick note about us and our firm. Impact DataSource, we're a 25-year-old economic consulting research and analysis firm. We've been doing EB5 analysis since 2010. We also often get asked, what else do we do besides EB5? And our non-EB5 side of the business, we focus on developing models and reporting for local economic development deals dealing with incentives. We provide local economic development organizations in-house models, and also provide lots of kind of one-off reporting services to help them analyze businesses coming into their area so that they can make good decisions on incentives, tax abatements, grants, and things of that nature. And we also do work with developers as well that are approaching the cities or counties as well that to help with incentive negotiations as well. On the EB5 side of things, we our main focus is comprehensive job creation reports, economic analysis, as well as comprehensive business plans, and then of course TEA certifications, which we'll be talking about today. We also we like to provide a lot of kind of free tools and analysis as well. We understand that navigating EB5 can be tricky, so we provide some free preliminary job estimates as well as free target employment area analysis reviews to help you kind of get a good idea of kind of the two really big important questions up front: is how many jobs will my project create, and is my project in a TEA? So we are happy to have one of our economists help you out with that at any time as you're starting to kick the tires on a brand new project. And other services we often get brought in to help out with RFEs. We do due diligence. We help out with the job creation reporting aspects of the regional centers 924A annual reporting requirements, and I-829s as well when the investors are trying to remove their conditions. So why are we here today? I was hoping to get the phone call this morning telling me exactly where the industry is heading, what the new TEA rules and regulations will be, when any changes might take place, but no one called me and gave me that information. So if anyone has the answers, please feel free to type that into the question bar, and I'll incorporate that into the webinar. But more or less, we're kind of in the same situation as last year. We've got to be mindful of a lot of different things, mindful of what's going on with the current rules and regulations for TEAs, and of course potential changes that might be coming along as well. So we'll kind of cover a lot of that. And again, feel free to type in any questions you might have. So kind of digging right in, we're going to start on what we need to kind of be mindful of under the ways things have currently been done, are currently being done and have been done for years. So why do we care? Why are we having this webinar right now? The main reason we're having it right now is because new unemployment data for high unemployment TEA certifications has been finalized, and states are starting to use this new data. And states are still the gatekeepers for almost all EB5 projects for TEA certifications. They're still involved with the high unemployment TEAs for projects within metropolitan statistical areas, and they're starting to use new data. So it's very key that we discuss that. We'll get a little bit more into the weeds about high unemployment TEAs and rural TEAs and how they're calculated later on. But for now, currently there's still two ways to kind of make a TEA: either high unemployment if you're within a metropolitan statistical area, and also you can be considered a rural TEA if you're outside of an MSA and also outside of a town or city with 20,000 population. The majority of you and the majority of EB5 projects, of course, are within the MSAs and have to worry about high unemployment and getting state certifications. The TEA, question is still kind of a make or break question for most projects moving forward, because the TEA threshold is still at 500,000, non-TEA is still at $1 million. So there's the big gap there, driving most projects needing to be in a TEA to be marketable as an EB5 project. So the high unemployment TEA, which most of you are probably worried about more, we need to be worried about changes happening every year. Rural is much simpler, much less often. We'll get into that later. So kind of big picture wise, high unemployment TEAs, still we have to hit this 150% of the US rate. So your project needs to be located in an area that has 150% of the US national unemployment rate. So what does that mean? Well, last year for 2016, that threshold was 7.4, but most states are switching from calendar year 16 over to calendar year 17. That threshold has now dropped to 6.6, which is 150% of the 4.4% average in 2017. So many states have already started using this data, and most will be within the next month or two. So 6.6% for almost all states. There's still a few exceptions out there: Tennessee, Arkansas, maybe some others that are going off a different 12-month period, such as July to June. But for almost all projects, 6.6 is kind of that new magical number that your TEA needs to hit. And so here's just a quick table kind of showing how the annual averages have changed over the years, just kind of a steady decrease since 2014. So the threshold is reduced from 7.4 to 6.6%. We get this question asked all the time. Well, the threshold went down, so it should be easier for me to make my TEA work, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. There's a lot of moving pieces that go into the final calculations. Typically, we're dealing with census tracts or combinations of census tracts, which have multiple pieces of data going into the final calculation. So it's hard to make any real generalizations. Each location just needs to be analyzed separately. So, a key question here is, there's this new data. Does that mean, do I need a new letter? And why does all this new data matter? So just as background on the TEA question. So, one of the most important questions asked when you're starting to look at an EB5 project is my project in the TEA? But there could be a significant time gap between when you're starting to look into a project and when you actually start getting investors for that project. So the key for TEAs is that the TEA certification really comes into play when your investors are actually coming on board. So at the time of the I-526, or when the investor makes their investment into the project. So when filing an I-526, how do you prove it's in a TEA? So almost all projects are going to need that TEA letter from the state authority, because you will be relying on census tracts or census block groups. However, if you happen to be in a rural area, then you don't have to get the states involved. And similarly, if your MSA or county qualifies on its own, you also don't need to worry about getting the states involved. But for most practical purposes, most projects are going to need the TEA letter from the state, because we're going to have to get down to the tract or potentially the block group letter. So again, the letter from the state is still a key here. So the reason we're having this webinar now is to talk about the timeliness of your TEA letter. So here's just a quick snippet from the USCIS policy manual that says that, yeah, the TEA really matters at the time of the investment or the time of the filing of the I-526. And so, if TEA data is changing each year, so these TEA letters expire. So in short, the answer is yes to that question. Now, when do they expire? So USCIS does not provide great guidance on this issue. They don't have any set says, well, this letter, all letters are good for this amount of time or anything like that. Some of the proposed legislation that came out did have some proposals to lock in a TEA for 3 years, 5 years, but none of that has been gone into effect yet, of course. So we want to go by best practices, and typically the best practice, in our opinion, is that you really should consider your TEA letter no longer valid once there's new data that is available. So basically, once the state starts using new data, all your 526 is starting from that point that your filing should be utilizing the new data that the state is using. So very important to discuss this issue with your consultants, attorneys, etc. Using outdated letters, it does add a risk factor to your petitions. And USCIS is, we're still seeing RFEs of USCIS, requesting updated letters because the I-526 petition was filed with an older letter. Just a point there at that bottom bullet there. California used to put in language in their letters that the more or less that the TEA is good from a year of the date of their letter. They took that out, though. I think they realized that USCIS isn't really going to provide any deference to what the state says on how long a letter might be good for. So again, best practice: file your I-526 using the most current data that the state was using at that time. But you don't need to keep refiling or getting new letters for that specific I-526. So at the I-829 stage, once your I-526 has been approved already, you don't need to keep updating that letter. But for longer projects where investors are being filed at different times, across many months or even years, different investors might have to use different letters. So an investor that filed last year could use a letter from last year, but investors going forward in that same project will need to get a new letter. Just want to touch base on some state-specific updates before we kind of get more into the weeds on some things here. So I was talking about, states are switching over their data now. Some are already using the new data, and so far we know for sure, and this list might not be complete right now, that Florida, Illinois, Indiana, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Washington, and North Carolina are already issuing letters with the updated data. I put Texas there as tricky because for those of you who have not worked in Texas, Texas is unique. The only state that has delegated responsibility of certifying TEAs down to the local level. So you have to deal with city mayors and county judges. So it can be tricky depending on where you're at in Texas. So if you have any questions about any Texas locations, feel free to email us or call us. We've worked, on projects all over Texas and have a good indication on how kind of the local authorities view EB-5 and how they might treat TEAs. A lot of you are probably wondering about California. California, in years past, sometimes have updated by now. Last year they didn't update till May 7th. This year, from the last time we checked their website, it looked like their website was kind of partially updated, so they should be getting updated soon, I think, and start using the data. Just a quick update on some states that seem to have kind of adapted their policies since last year. Again, none of these are written in stone, just from our conversations with them. Alabama seems to have, now restricting things to just a single census tract instead of allowing any aggregation of census tracts. North Carolina appears to be also not as flexible as they were in the past. Same with the city of Fort Worth in Texas, seems to be a little bit less flexible than they may have been in the past. And San Antonio currently has their TEA policy under review and may not be issuing any new letters for some months here. So let us know if you have any questions about any of those as well. The states are kind of constantly, they might be changing things at a moment's notice. You kind of never know. So let us know if you have any questions. Quickly, why are TEAs important? We kind of touched on this already, so I'll kind of go over this quickly. Under the current lay of the land, we've got the TEA threshold at 500,000 versus the non-TEA at 1 million. And again, we've got this rural and high unemployment, two ways to kind of make that happen. Again, 98% of all EB-5 projects over the last 5-6 years have been in TEAs. the obvious reason of the threshold differential. We often get the question, excuse me, I'm doing a direct EB5 project. I'm not doing a regional center project. That means I don't have to get a TEA letter, right? Well, just to clarify, there's no difference in the TEA rules and regulations for direct or regional center EB5 projects. You still have to get the TEA letter just like you would for a regional center project if you're doing direct. So let's talk a little bit, to get a little bit more into the weeds on the current definitions. Just to touch base on the rural areas. So again, if you have a rural project, it's nice from the TEA standpoint because you don't have to get the states involved. You just have to prove to USCIS that you're both outside of an MSA and outside of a city or town having a population of 20,000 or more. Again, rural areas, the definitions don't change. So the population that's 20,000 resident criteria is based off the most recent decennial census. So we're not going to see, any updates to that until the 2020 census is complete. So we've got a while there. As far as the MSA criteria goes, they do some fluctuations, some minor changes every once in a while, but there's usually not, no great impact on counties dropping in or out of MSAs. I think the most recent update only added one county to an MSA, and that was the Twin Falls, Idaho county. So if you have any projects in that section of Idaho, then you might have to do some different thinking about your TEA. Again, there's no provision that allows a state to designate a rural area, so you don't have to worry about dealing with the states, and the states don't really have any authority to do anything anyway. So with your I-526 petitions, you should provide your own evidence that it qualifies as rural. And we provide those kind of mini reports all the time just to show USCIS that both those boxes, both those criteria to be rural are checked off. Back to high unemployment, just kind of the official language about we have to hit the 150% of the national average rate from the policy manual. So again, we're not going to get too big into the weeds on the calculations or anything, but most states use what's called a census share method to calculate census tract unemployment, in which the majority of TEAs have to get down to the census tract level. But TEAs you don't have to necessarily deal with census tracts if you happen to be your project's in a county or an MSA that qualifies on its own. Most area counties or MSAs don't have that high level of unemployment. Thank goodness. So they usually don't have that pop up. So most of the time we're dealing with tracts or block groups, but not always. Just a quick example, in practice, how this most TEAs under the current rules are kind of done. This map shows a map of census tracts. The orange census tracts indicate areas of high unemployment. The non-orange, or clear census tracts indicate tracts that do not have high unemployment on their own, and the star there indicates the location of the project. So the project doesn't qualify on its own with its own census tract. But there's enough surrounding census tracts that we can reach the level to get above what we need to get, just to kind of show you how that final TEA area might work. Again, it's not usually that easy, but just to kind of show you the mechanics of how the TEA under the current rules kind of works out. So we have updated our free public map with this latest data. We'll check it out here just for a few seconds here. But if you have any questions on the map, you can also look at our YouTube channel for how to use the map. But if you used it before, it kind of has our familiar setup. So you can scroll in and out. It's got census tracts that qualify on their own that have above 6.6% in orange. So you can see this tract in the city of Austin has 10.7. So it's highlighted orange. You can scroll in and out. There's also rural indicators on the counties, And so if I scroll out here, the blue counties are rural in their entirety. And then this kind of turquoise color means that the county is rural, except for there is a city that has more than 20,000 population here. So you can see Kerr County, Texas is rural, except for anywhere within the Kerrville city limits, because Kerrville has more than 20,000 population based on the most recent census. So the map has, kind of all the data there that you would need to, do census tract aggregation. So if your project was here, you could pull the data from here and combine tracts from these surrounding areas to kind of get the math to work, or try to see if it would work. So the map is a good guide. It certainly is not the end all be all for all TEA calculations. As we'll find out, all states do things differently. Some will let you get down even further into census block groups. Some states aren't as flexible as some others as far as how we might be able to aggregate census tracts. So if you have any questions, or you'd like us just to take another look at your TEA, or you've been told that it doesn't work, or you just think it won't work, or there's no chance, shoot it over and we can take a look, have one of our economists take a look at it for you. I'm happy to. So kind of the TEA certification process, again, we're still just talking about under the current rules, the current lay of the land. So again, the simple scenario is we don't have to get the states involved, but that's very rare. Typically in practice, relying on census tracts or sometimes block groups, we must get the state TEA letter. So just kind of a recap there. Again, key takeaway is that states' processes differ and often drastically. California, they still have a 12 census tract limit on how many census tracts you could use in your TEA. Most states don't have necessarily a stated limit, but some will, definitely take a look at the area and might have issues if it looks too creative, for example. And some other states are just very flexible under the current rules. And we'll get into kind of why they're allowed to do that right as of now. So here, kind of specific language from the policy manual there at the bottom. So consistent with the regs, USCIS defers to the state determinations on the appropriate boundaries. So under the current rules, the states really can kind of certify any shape or any TEA as long as the math was done correctly and it's contiguous and it was using the latest data. So USCIS, if things are done correctly, they can't really question the area, but they're certainly going to check the math and the timeliness of the data. And this is all kind of laid out in the policy manual as well. And so kind of the state of the EB-5 program, I don't think anyone sent me over the answers yet, so we'll just kind of keep on rolling through here. So it seems like we've got a quote unquote clean extension until September 30th, 2018. But we've got, seems like the legislative potential for reform doesn't seem like there's anything on the horizon now or happening anytime soon. So for now, we're still operating on the current rules and regulations. It doesn't seem like it seems unlikely that there's going to be any new legislation before September 30th. However, I think it seems like the DHS regulations, proposed rules, which we'll get into more here, seems like it might be, if there are going to be changes, it seems like those might have more likelihood of happening now. So what are the proposed rules and what happened here? So in January 2017, DHS released proposed rulemaking. The comment period is now over, and the proposed rules included a very significant increase to the investment levels here. We've got standard investment potentially going from 1 million to outside of the TEA going from 1 million to 1.8, and the TEA going from 500 to 1.35. So those are huge increases to the current levels. From kind of recent rumblings through the industry, it seems like there, could be some potential wiggle room for negotiations to kind of decrease that gap a little bit, both making the overall size of the investment level smaller, and then also the threshold between TEA and non-TEA be a little bit smaller as well. But it's kind of who knows on where this could potentially be heading. But it seems like if there are changes that are going to happen, it seems like there's a decent chance the investment levels are going to go up, and perhaps substantially. Another key issue with the DHS proposed rules is that it would remove the state authorities for the TEA processes, and this could have potentially some positive effects and potentially some negative effects, at least in my opinion. Could kind of have the process be more clear, since right now kind of states do things differently. They allow different methods. I mean, they allow different kind of, their flexibility is different. They update their data at different times of the year. Some use different data completely, so there can be some confusion there. This could kind of level the playing field as far as what data is being used. But of course, big concerns on, typically now, you can get a state, to kind of give you a response within a week or two on if it's going to qualify as a TEA. Certain definitely valid concerns on DHS taking over TEAs and their response times, et cetera, just for how long it's taking currently for 924s and 526s and I-829s to be adjudicated. So who knows there? It's kind of similar to the DHS proposed rules. Also, all the proposed legislation we've seen that's come out over the last year or two seem that almost all of those also took power away from the states and would have given it to DHS regarding TEAs. And then also, of course, is besides the investment amounts going up, removing the states is definitely limiting the grouping of census tracts. So the DHS proposed rules are kind of what's been coined contiguous and adjacent only. So under the current rules, states can kind of certify can kind of be however flexible they want to be, as long as the area is all contiguous. There's no gaps between any two census tracts. But the DHS proposed rules would kind of severely limit that by only allowing you to utilize tracts that are touching the project tract. So in this graph, which I think is straight from the DHS proposed rules, kind of shows an example of the project tract outlined in orange, all the touching tracts outlined in that kind of dashed purple. And if you either you can get the math to work using just those tracks, or you can't, and kind of that's the only option you have. So to kind of show how limiting that might be, for example, here's downtown Memphis with a significant amount of unemployment. That's shown by the orange census tracts, but there's this kind of one pocket here. So if there was an EB5 project in that turquoise census tract, it would not be able to be qualified as a TEA. So just kind of one example of how restricting that could be compared to the way things are done now, where likely Tennessee would likely certify that area currently by using just a combination of 3 or 4 tracks. It'd be a very simple combination. So potentially big changes there. Again, we don't really know if or when these might happen. Heard some rumblings that targeting summer for potentially changes, but again, it's hard to put any firm guesses into that. If anyone has the answers, let me know for sure. Again, unclear when these would take effect. Specifics of the final rules are unknown, and there is, I guess, the possibility that if the DHS proposed rules did come into play, they could potentially be superseded by if legislative reforms did get passed. I don't know how likely that would be. So just touching base back on the legislative changes that were proposed, besides integrity measures, investment amounts, and potentially new definitions of TEAs, just to kind of look at how some of the other legislative proposals and how different they are to how things are currently done. Just have a few kind of quick slides here, but I'd highly recommend that you check out our blog. Maggie Mullane another economist at our firm has written extensively on kind of the legislative changes and then the DHS proposed rules, and has a lot of great info on our blog, a lot of great charts and graphs to kind of help you kind of cycle through this. So, like for example, here's how things are looking these days, and how you kind of decide if it is a project in a TEA. But you can kind of see how more complicated things might be under the proposed legislations, and she has a lot of great comparisons out there of things. So I'd highly recommend you check out our blog. We're not going to get into it too much here. Again, we kind of touched on a little bit, a lot of similarities we're seeing between the proposed regulations and also the proposed legislation regarding TEAs. Again, removing the state authority, and then also seems to stay focused on census tracts and limiting their groupings. To kind of back up, while the DHS proposed regulations kind of allowed the adjacent and contiguous, most of the proposed legislation, Grassley and Cornyn, etc., really limiting things only to one census tract. And they also had new criteria in there as well, besides high unemployment, such as poverty levels and income, kind of mimicking the new market tax credits. But in the proposed legislation, the TEA threshold versus non-TEA threshold was much smaller than it is now. Again, who knows if any of that might take effect, but yeah, I'd highly suggest read our blog for more details on that. So a little Q&A, some questions that we often get asked, and had a few that popped in before the webinar, but if you have any questions, please go ahead and shoot those over. So I'll dig into a few of the ones that are kind of more general questions that we often get. So kind of the first one, can you help certify any area in any state as a TEA? We can certainly review and take a look at any location you have, but it's, you can't just say that, well, no matter where my location is, I can get it certified as a TEA. Each state does things differently. Sometimes the data just doesn't allow for a TEA construction, no matter how flexible the state might be. So we just have to evaluate each one on a case-by-case basis. Let's see. And this second question, is there a fast way to get a list of TEAs by state? Do certain states already have pre-designated TEAs? Sort of yes and no. Some state agencies like California do have really good websites that they kind of show, what areas already qualify on their own, like, this city or this county qualifies on its own. But most states really don't have a lot of, really good information on the websites, but some certainly do. But, due to the large number of possible ways to make a TEA through census tract combinations, states aren't really able to kind of post an exhaustive list of all TEA eligible areas. Question, for USCIS to approve the TEAs, is it sufficient to just send unemployment reports, or must there be more supporting documents? So kind of back to kind of sum up some of the things we talked about earlier, you don't need a state letter if it's a rural TEA. You just provide your own independent evidence that it checks both boxes. You also don't need a TEA letter for if your MSA or county qualifies on its own, but you can usually get one pretty easily from the state anyway. So you have to provide the TEA letter. You have to have if you're getting down to census tracts or block groups. And I believe the rules also now kind of leave cities out of it. So if your city qualifies on its own, then I do believe you still need the state letter to show that. The policy manual for now just says you don't need it if it qualifies at the MSA or the county level. How long does it take to get a TEA letter right now? Depends on the location and the state. Some states turn things around very quickly. Other states take a long time. Right now, some states are kind of backlogged because they've got a ton of recertification requests. Most states usually will get back to you within a couple of weeks, though. But if you have any questions, just go ahead and email me or submit a free TEA review request, and we'll let you know based on your location how long it might take. Question, I filed my I-526. I got this one before the webinar. I filed my I-526 with the latest and greatest state letter at that time. Do I need to renew the TEA letter for the I-29 stage? So no. Again, if the individual I-526 was filed correctly with the latest TA letter at that time, you do not need to keep renewing your letter each year. You don't need to show USCIS proof that the I-29 state that is still a TEA. And the latest policy manual does a good job of clearly explaining that. And let's see, I think we've got a few other questions coming in here. Just one second. Take a look. Just had one additional comment to add here. Actually, hold on. Here's one more. Sorry. The question is, if the DHS adjacent and contiguous rule goes into place, will they still use census share? Okay, so attendees asking, so if the DHS proposed rules do go into place like we had talked about, so back towards this this idea here, the contiguous and adjacent only, will DHS still use census share methodology? So they're asking, will DHS use the same methodology as the states are currently using to calculate census tract unemployment rates? I have no idea. I would guess so, and I would hope so, because I think it's the most correct way to do it. But there was nothing that I've seen in the proposed rules where they really had a clear specification of here's exactly what data we're going to use and the methodology we're going to use. So if you have any questions, if you think ask if your project would qualify if those rules ever went into place, let us know for sure. Let's see, second question. My first investors filed in January. I'm planning on filing more investors, same project in July. Will I need a new TEA letter? The answer to that is likely yes, because the state, if the first investor was filed in January and you're filing additional investors in July, the data for that state will most likely have changed by that time, and they've been using new data. So that July investor should get an updated letter and have it more recent than the investor that was filed in January. And let me see, so through a few of these. All right. Had another question. Do you need updated TA letter if all investors are filed? What about the period between 526 filing and I-29? So again, no. As long as the I-526s were filed with the correct letter, then you do not need to keep getting new letters. Again, if you have any questions on this timing, highly suggest speak with us or check with your immigration attorney as well. I had a comment here to just please remind everyone that the validity of the TA letter at the time of the investment is key when the project is not using an escrow account. So if the funds are made immediately available to the project, then the TEA letter would need to be valid at that time. So again, the language from USCIS is either at the time of the I-526 filing or the time of the immigrant investment. So really good point there to just, if you have any questions, again, reach out to your attorney, or we're happy to talk with you as well. I think there's one more. Actually, I believe that's, actually, hold on, I'll do one more. No, I think that's it. So again, if you have any questions on economic studies, business plans, TEAs, feel free to always give us a call or email us. And should be some interesting times ahead, of course, as always, for the EB-5 program. And thanks again for dropping into the webinar. And we'll shoot everyone an email when the YouTube video and the slides are available. Thanks again, everybody.